Nevertheless, the left seems to have got into bed, so to speak, with neoliberalism, I guess at roughly around the time of our wonderful Prime Minister Blair, and other great leaders worldwide who adopted, I guess, a more blatant form of monetarism, of capitalism, which was then labelled progressive neoliberalism by some people. Now, this seems to me to have been very successful because on an ideological front, everybody seems to have got on board. Could you please help me understand why it was so appealing to the liberals of the society and other societies?
Well, see, it's predominantly the centre-left that's done that. Yeah. That's where centre-left stroke centre-right, hard to work out sometimes. Yeah. But they've all done economics 101. They've done a course in, politics, philosophy, etc., etc. And in that stuff, they all accept a first year of economics view of how the world operates. Supply and demand, equilibrium. Governments make things worse when they bring in regulations most of the time, but also a soft argument, again, that the government should do something to try to stimulate the economy somehow, but most of the way keep its way out of there and get the market to work better. They don't really battle over being better managers of the economy, believing that their manual to manage the economy is the first year economics textbook. Now, what happens is, and I've had this discussion from friends who worked in the Prime Minister's office in Australia back in the Labor Party days, they said there'd be some event coming in, it'd throw everybody sideways, they'd squabble over what to do, and finally somebody would suggest something that popped out of a first-year economics textbook, and because they understood it, that's what they'd end up doing.
Yeah.
And it appeared to work for the period from the 1990s through to 2007, because in the background, completely ignored by neoliberalism and ignored by anybody who studied this stuff, was a rising level of private debt. And that finance, that increasing debt levels meant credit was growing, and credit was adding to demand and making up for the absence of real productive activity in the economy.
Yep.
You got more and more financialisation. That continued working until you went, in England's case, from a private debt level of 60% of GDP to a private debt level of 195% of GDP over 30 years.
Yeah.
And when you hit that peak, there was no more credit, and all that made it look like things were working well evaporated, and they had no idea that it disappeared because they weren't aware it was a source of demand in the first place.
Yeah. Now, what I find very confronting on a personal level, actually, is the fact that Democrats, socialists in this country, have been promoting policies which actually are very neoliberal. But they're coming across, we very cleverly sort of convinced ourselves that this is the way forward, this is the progressive way forward. And one of the levers, one of the packaging formats is, for example, let's take the gender warfare. So if you're sort of, you're feminist or you're gay or whoever you are, you're slightly non-traditional, then you're going to probably vote for a neoliberal party. I mean, I'm looking as a sociologist and I'm making huge generalization, which are very dangerous. But the essence of what I'm trying to ask you is, how is it that we have been fooled into believing that neoliberalism will somehow equate to a more just society?
Largely because they believed that was a manual for managing a capitalist economy.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to do is say, let's let the left manage the economy rather than the right. So therefore we have to show we're better economic managers. This is the Blair line and the line by Keating and Cohen in Australia as well, and of course to some extent Clinton in America. And by managing the economy better, we will be able to do our social agenda.
Right.
And therefore lefty politics types who want to talk about feminism or gay rights or environment, hop on our bandwagon, we'll get the economy working, you can do the social stuff, and we'll all come out ahead. Now, they didn't realise they were on a freight train to nothing, in the sense that the reason the economy was driving well was this expansion of credit, which was liberated by the deregulations that went with the Economics 101 manual. So there was a train wreck coming. And people from my perspective in economics who focus upon credit as an essential part of how a capitalist economy operated said, that's why it looks like things are working now. You're going to hit a wall at some point.
Yeah.
Stop believing this stuff, get ready for it. But the neoliberals, and I've had personal conversations with some politicians on this front in Australia, just basically disparage anybody with that view, thinking you're going to fail.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're talking about. We're going to succeed and we're going to ignore you. Then it hit them. And of course now they're in total disarray because the only people that seem to make any sense are the Corbyns of the world who've stuck to the same tune from 40 years beforehand.
Just final question now. So we're in this situation where the neoliberals are blaming other capitalists, and probably capitalists who are more capitalist even than they are, but nevertheless they're blaming other capitalists for a situation that can only be solved, as far as I can understand, if capitalism itself is reappraised and a whole new system and model is worked out, which has been worked out by people, but they are rejected because they're too old-fashioned or too old or whatever. But please explain to me one other thing, Professor Keane. Why is it that migrants are, scapegoated as being kind of the victims, as the cause of problems, particularly at the moment?
Oh, it depends. This is actually something I've seen in Australia quite regularly over its long history of immigration. And the opposition to the next wave of migration almost always comes from the previous wave. Yeah. Because people who feel vulnerable to people coming in who may take their jobs away, that pressure is minimised when you have full employment. In the genuine sense that, like in Australia's case, the recorded unemployment rate was during the 60s and 70s was below 2%. And in that milieu, you can absorb virtually any number of people. But what you've had over time, courtesy of this rise in private debt and the leverage that goes with it, and there's a distribution of income not from workers to capitalists, but from workers to bankers. That's where the inequality comes from. Yeah. The working class is suffering. They've actually got lower unemployment coming into this over time, a trend towards falling employment. In that situation, you're going to be blaming people who might be coming in and taking your job, and at the same time, the capitalists, of course, are trying to hire cheaper labour. Yep. That's a combination that ultimately means that you can turn people who feel vulnerable about their job security against the people who are coming in who might undermine them, rather than against the people who are employing them.
So what's happening in America is Mr. Trump is just another form of neoliberalism, or what?
Well, no, he's actually maybe a Trojan horse for the not for neoliberalism by any means, but for a strong pro-wealthy, pro-capitalist thing. But what he's tapped into is the genuine frustration